Hello and welcome to SciLux, the podcast where we talk about scientific developments and technological changes in Luxembourg and sometimes also in Europe. But today, again, we are in Luxembourg. We have a researcher based in Luxembourg, which also means that we are proudly powered by Research Luxembourg and recording at the University of Luxembourg, so the media center of the University of Luxembourg. And our guest today is Dr. Gilles Evrard Essuman, who is a research associate at LISER, specializing in social innovation, community economies, and socio-territorial transformation processes. Gilles, thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you very much, Anna.
Okay, I actually omitted one thing that you had in your description when I looked at it on the LISER website, and it said that you are an action researcher, and I actually wanted to start with it. What does it mean? Action researcher.
Well,
other researchers just don't do action.
Not what I meant by that, or not. That's not what action researcher means. But I identify as an action researcher in the sense that I like to do research that moves community, that moves things, and then I like to be on the field and test ideas with communities, with people, do things with them to understand from their point of view. So the idea is not just to go out there and extract knowledge for my research, but do with them and then support the creation of knowledge itself with the communities. Yeah.
So it is the same as participatory action? Or not?
It comes from there.
Okay.
It comes from participatory action research, basically. Yeah.
But that's so difficult. I mean, it's way easier to be just, theoretical and not have to deal with people on a daily basis.
Well, I feel that if we are doing research and then the point of the research is to support communities, it makes sense to actually work with them and understand things from their point of view and also perhaps support them with theory that they can translate into action to change things at their local levels.
It starts with actually gaining their trust.
Exactly, and that's the point that takes a lot of time. So maybe for a very little thing that I want to understand, I might have to spend maybe 3, 4, 6 months with a community, interacting with them, building trust, understanding things from their point of view, and even them adopting me, in quotes, so that I become part of them. And it's also difficult because I am there being part of them, but I don't have to forget I'm still a researcher and I need to do research to understand what they are doing and also deduct some knowledge from it. So it's quite complex and it's very tricky. I wouldn't say that it always works well, but definitely I think that I gain satisfaction from it.
So how do you choose those communities? Is it more about the affinity because you just feel better among certain communities, or is it just because they interest you as such, or where does it start?
I think it could work either ways. So it could be maybe topical. So if I am working, for instance, on local currencies, and I check and I see that there is a certain affinity in a certain community, I would definitely want to invest myself more with them to understand things from their point of view. And it makes more sense for me to approach it that way.
So you used one of the things that I wanted to discuss today, which is local currencies. So what are they actually?
Well, another buzzword, right? But local currencies is basically money that is created in a community or in a specific place to support the local economy. So let's take an assumption. If today you spend €1, it could go anywhere in Europe where euro is a legal tender. But if you're using a local currency, you can only spend that money in that specific place, which means that you are supporting the economy. You're supporting businesses there. So it's supporting the economy and it's making it grow. That is as simply as I could explain what local currencies are.
Is it difficult to have it legally established?
Well, it depends on the law of the country. The thing is, for sure, there's always regulation that is implemented by the central banks of the country. And then, for instance, I know in France, the Bank of France has something about local currencies, and usually one note of that currency is equal to €1 to ensure that people are not doing things anyway. It's still backed by law. So in the sense, it's difficult because you have to follow the law and follow what the law tells you, but also it's not that difficult to start it once you observe how other currencies are working, you try to understand it, and then you try to design it such a way that you don't get into trouble.
But it also means that you have to have special, machine to print it. It's a little bit like normal currency or not. How do you make sure that it's not forged in this particular situation?
So the thing is that usually local currencies are governed by charters that is designed by a specific community. And of course, they also have their own security features on the currency to ensure that everything is still legal and everything is well done. But not all of them also use legal tenders like paper as a means of transaction. Some of them use digital platforms to facilitate the transaction. So in that case, you don't have to print in a physical note, but you can also use maybe the app. As far as you're part of the community, you have access to it.
Before we talk about real examples, because I know that you research certain currencies more than others, I think it's a good moment to ask the pub quiz question, because it is about local currencies. So, Gilles, can you ask the question right now? And listeners, remember, answer only at the end of the podcast.
So my pub question today is, how many local currencies exist today in Europe, and which country has the highest of them?
Okay. And as I said, answer only at the end of the podcast. And don't Google. I always say it, don't Google, we'll tell you. And that also, it's very surprising.
Google doesn't have the correct answer, by the way.
Really?
Yes.
Oh,
you have to dig further than Google.
Okay, well, perfect. That's really good. You're saying that. This means that people will stay and listen, continue listening to us. All right, so I just already prompted it. There are certain currencies that you researched more, right? One of it was Ladum, I think.
That's correct, Ladum, yeah.
And why this one, and what was your research about?
In the beginning, we talked about me doing action research. So even though I'm doing my research in Luxembourg, I was researching a bit the impact of local currencies on territorial transformation processes. And then because I wanted to use the participatory action research approach, I needed to find a community where I already knew the local dynamics, and it was easier for me to observe things from a close perspective. And then the thing is, I started my research on the topic somewhere in 2019, and 2020 COVID started. So I had to move back to France, to my city, to stay with the family. And then they have a local currency which was booming, that was emerging. So I was like, this is perfect because I already know the local dynamics. I know some of the people that are already working on the currency. I know a number of businesses that are using, transacting with it. So it was easier for me to immerse myself, experiment things with them, talk to them, and also support some of their projects. So I think that was how the decision was made to work on Ladum, which comes from Le Puy de Dôme, which is the department where the currency is. And then Ladum comes from the name Dôme, basically. Yeah.
And how does it all start? For example, for Ladum, like what is the sparkle that, makes people think, okay, now is the time we want a local currency?
Well, Ladum's story was interesting because even though the currency officially started in 2015, they had the idea way back in 2009. So after the COP of 2009, the one that was had in Copenhagen, there was a lot of issues about the planet's sustainability. And then I feel at least what the collective that spearheaded the project told me was that a good number of them were disappointed by the outcomes of that meeting. And then they felt like, well, if the politicians and the people at the top are not going to change things proactively, maybe it's time for us to change things at the local level. And then they got inspired by other currencies in France that were doing some similar things. Like, well, maybe we could start a local currency, design a charter so we can produce, consume locally, but also support businesses. And out of it, we will have more social welfare. We will have more community inclusion. So basically, one thing to lead to the other, and then they kickstarted that project.
So what I understand from local currencies is that exactly they support the local economy. Are they also more involved in, you said, social inclusion, right? So there is this kind of a thinking of supporting certain projects more or not?
Yeah, totally. So the idea is to create an alternative space to the mainstream economy where the idea is not just about accumulating capital and making profit, but also the wealth that is created is redistributed in a certain way to the community to empower it. So for instance, with Ladum, what I discovered is that the reserve. So I explained in the beginning that for Ladum, for instance, one Dôme is equal to €1. And while the Dômes are circulating, they have a legal reserve at the Bank of France. And that money is sitting in an account. So instead of just sitting there, they use it to support businesses. They give loans at interest-free rates so that businesses can use it to support, to develop their businesses, develop new projects. And I spoke to some businesses that benefited from it and were very happy. And then beyond that, they also created what they call the Solidum, which is is a food social security system where every month maybe everybody gives 5 dum, but some people could give 2, some can give 20. By the end of the month, that money is redistributed equally amongst everybody. So somebody that gave 1 dum could receive maybe 15 dum because somebody gave more, and that money is used to buy food, to purchase things from other businesses, local sustainable businesses. So it's a way of redistributing the wealth and also empowering much more marginalized community. I know for sure that there's a lot of students in Clermont that are using the currency and using it to buy food because they know that they will get something out of it, and it's also supporting them. So I think it's a good thing actually that they came up with this.
So this is a very, rosy, pink, rose, how do you say that? Even the glasses that have a rose-rimmed, whatever, positive. There we go. Yeah. Positive approach. But I guess there are challenges too, or not?
There is a lot. There is a lot of challenges. So as you understand, the currency itself, usually they are started as associations or NGOs, which means that most of the people working are just volunteers. So there's no remuneration for it. So balancing your normal work and then voluntary work is very difficult, and then it's time intensive to actually run up that. So there's a lot of participation and burnout in these organizations. In fact, a lot of them are not really thriving so well at some point, but then it's good that they are being able to recruit new people to join, but even the recruitment is very difficult because explaining already what a local currency is and convincing people to join is also difficult. So usually you have a few businesses that are using it, but at some point, because people are not using it, they feel like, okay, maybe it doesn't add any value to us to keep doing it, because anyways, we are going to get paid either in euros or in a local currency. So the idea is, how do we encourage people to use it more, and how do we explain the added values of using a local currency in the context of territorial development?
Throughout my life, I have participated in a lot of projects with NGOs, with youngsters and elderly, a lot of different things. And one of the things I noticed, this is of course not backed by any data, just me personally noticing it, there was a struggle of involving youth. Right? And as you're saying, I mean, whenever there's a project, at a certain moment, you have to convince the youth more and more, right? So how is it going, actually, from your perspective, participation and youth?
With regard to local currency or in general?
Let's start with local currency, because you said the students are excited.
I mean, I think it's always about finding something that works also for the other party, right? So, for instance, I know the students, they are excited to contribute because they know that by using the currency, they also benefit from it. They get to have access to good quality food that is sourced locally through the Solidum, for instance, initiative launched by Ladum. So that is very interesting for them because they gain something out of it, but also they get to do some intergenerational exchanges, because as you would understand, at least in France, a lot of volunteers from NGOs are usually elderly people that retire, that have more time. So these are spaces where the young people get to meet other people, those that have this passion to maybe support different demographies of people, and in different generations they have the chance to meet people, to have fun cultural activities. So it's also a bit like a social outlet for them to also meet other people, engage in different activities, and also it's a way of doing activism in a good way, right? So it makes sense for a lot of these young people.
So let's move to Luxembourg a little bit. We also have a local currency here. What is it and how is that going?
In Luxembourg, we have a local currency, Becky, that was started in Beckerich, Canton de Redange, somewhere in 2012. They are still in existence. They are the only local currency in Luxembourg. And then, like I was mentioning, the difficulties are the same. Recruiting more people, making it have much more value and interest. And we all know that Luxembourg is a huge financial hub. So how do we convince people to look at this kind of alternatives to the economy and alternative currencies, right? And then that is, I think, is the main hurdle that they have. But I think surviving from 2012 till now, I think is already a very good thing. So we should give them kudos for that.
Of course. I've never had a chance actually to see it. I just know it theoretically, but for sure, there's a website, you can check more about it, and I will also share. So if you're going there, please support the economy, this idea. You said you go to these communities to do research. So how does it work? Like, what do you just take a seat of a researcher and you look at them while they are preparing something for the local currency, for example, or any other project? How does research practically, in your case, look like? Do you do interviews? What is it?
One thing that I personally like to do a lot is observation. So maybe, let's say, the first time that I encountered Ladum as a local currency where I wanted to research on them, because I knew of them, I was using the currency, but when I actually developed research interest, what I started doing was just attending events, looking at the kind of topics that you're talking about in their event, what are the kind of events that they were doing, what are the kind of the activities that they were doing. So making notes, observing, sometimes taking photos, asking proactive questions, just taking a bit of a posture where I was just a participant, so that we could call participant observation, right? And then after then, I declared my research interest to them. So, okay, I've been attending. By the time that I already attended a few events, they recognized my face. So when I come up again with an interest and then explain what is in my research as an interest for them, then we developed a mutual interest to co-create knowledge and to co-develop some ideas together. So it's a bit of not only co-opting, but also cooperating and also making them part of the research process itself.
So what is co-creating knowledge actually?
Well, that is a very big buzzword, but co-creating knowledge is basically involving the other party in the creation of knowledge, in the investigation of what is it already exists and what they are doing and how what they are doing could contribute to what we already know. So investing time to understand things from their perspective, but also to let them understand how theory works and merge their practices with theory and then generate something new that could be interesting and beneficial for both myself as a researcher, but also for them as a community organization.
So it's never like you go there and say, I know what you should do.
Well, I think researchers usually know that they don't know much. That's why they are researching, right? No, you don't adopt that posture because, of course, already that is a big block. You are not going to get people to cooperate with you if you just show up saying that you know. And then I don't think it's true that you know, because if you know, you'll be part of them. You are not part of them, so you cannot know things when you're not on the inside, right? So it's about showing up, having what I call adopting a naive perspective. So you might know, but just come with a blank sheet. Okay, what can I understand from what is happening here? How can I relate what I know already, maybe from a theoretical perspective, to what is actually being done, and then find the missing gaps and then try to fill it with knowledge that we might get from them or through other sources, doing more reading, attending different events or doing different things to kind of fill that gap. So I think it comes with first having this humility that we don't know much, we want to know, and we want to engage with these communities to know from their point of view.
And then the methods you apply are, for example, the design thinking methods, I would assume, in these cases.
Yes, so beyond interviews, focus groups and everything, which could also be embedded in design thinking, by the way, could be interesting to adopt as a process, also as a method to actually investigate communities and also work with them. So design thinking is basically thinking while doing with, and also thinking the design of new ideas, of new projects through proactive thinking, proactive iteration, proactive reflections with the community that we are working with.
This sounded very buzzy, I have to say, because what is proactive thinking?
Well, it means what it says. So proactive thinking is basically dealing with coming with initial ideas of what we know, but also getting there, observing what is being done, reflecting on it, and trying to anticipate what could be generated if we try to implement what we had imagined, right? So it comes with its process of constantly reflecting, doing, and doing a lot of iterations to arrive at something that actually works.
Listeners might not know, but I do have a little bit of a background in design thinking as well. And one of my struggles when I did that is that you also have to actually train the people until they are able to iterate. People naturally just are not born with this kind of idea that they can fail many times, in the sense that they just don't come up with a solution at the first moment. And the fact that whatever they say in the beginning, okay, we talk about brainstorming, yes, okay. But in a way, what I noticed is that very often the participants in my projects come there with, okay, we have 2 hours, and by these 2 hours, then we will have all the solutions we need. And it's really a long process of iteration, of rediscussing, of involving new people and so on and so forth, right?
Yeah, totally. It takes a lot of time, so it takes a lot of patience from the researcher and also from the community, I talked about participation fatigue. So the onus also lies on the researcher to create a way to engage the community, to make it fun for them, and also understand what is the added value for them to keep trying and to keep iterating, to keep testing different ideas. So it's always about that. So that is where, as a researcher, you have to get on the field, having already planned maybe different steps and different things that you want to do, and also how you want to take care of setbacks, and also how you want to take different approaches to be able to stimulate this emotional energy from the community that you're working with.
Yes, and also stimulate the innovation in that particular case, which is very, very tricky. Because one of the things, we talked about the local currency, but in general, the specialization that I mentioned, is social innovation, right? And innovation is such a word that everyone likes using. But then if you really want to innovate, what do you actually do? What is innovation for you personally? And social innovation on top of it.
When we talk about innovation, I think the first thing that comes to the mind of people is technological innovation.
Exactly.
So bringing to reality new ideas, new things that are going to revolutionize things, that are going to change maybe how we consume, how we use technology, how we eat, and a lot of things. But social innovation is basically coming up with ideas and then different ways of doing things to solve maybe wicked problems, or also to change territorial dynamics, to change local realities, to change social realities also, and change societal aspects of community development. So I think it's very important to look at it from the point of view. It's not just about coming up with a technological thing, but social innovation is also about how we empower communities to develop ideas that actually work for them at the local level, at the grassroots level.
But it also means that in the very beginning, it's not going to be really innovation. Actually training your mind to be very innovative, it's not going to take 1 month.
No, it does not. But then the whole process already of setting different stakeholders, different identities that have different approaches to a problem, to design a new way of looking at it, to design a solution in itself is innovation, right? And that co-creation part is where the innovation happens, because we could have a banker, we could have a local producer, we could have a researcher, we could have a citizen sitting around the table and developing. That itself is a process. And then that process could be what we could consider as a social innovation process, yeah.
It's also good you said that it can be a process, right? Because we, again, as you said, first of all, innovation, you think tech, and then secondly, you think an app. Yeah. I think that's more or less where we are, right? And it's also sometimes where the funding goes, which is a bit, but let me not comment on this too much. But we also have some social innovation and social businesses happening in Luxembourg, right? So there is the whole CIS movement. So we have the Société d'Impact Sociétal that are there. And we have, in general, pretty fast developing social and solidarity economy. So how does it look? We're coming back to Luxembourg before we go to France again.
So in Luxembourg, I know that the status of Société d'Impact Sociétal has been launched officially, I think, quite recently. I don't have the exact date, but I had met some people that were working on it. And then I know that there's about 50 companies in Luxembourg now that are SES, and then I think it's growing. So I think there's not much visibility on it, but it's something that is there. And I know the government is putting a lot of effort to encourage people to look at that side. So I think it has some potential. But then again, we need to educate much more people about what are the added values for them, and then the community, and also let them know that there's a support system that has been created to encourage them to look into that direction. If not anything, there's tax benefits. So that could be a good way to look at it.
True. In Luxembourg, we have the Social Business Incubator, where you can also participate in a program that helps you actually develop your own business. So if you're interested, again, I will share some links to those programs to check. I also, from my background, know that stuff is developing. So do check that space, because definitely there's going to be more. But again, we're in Luxembourg, as you said. I mean, it's a financial center, and people are traditional thinkers in some way, aren't they? Do you see that it's more difficult to do social innovation and develop these businesses? Or this is not your specialization to really tell me?
It's not a question of specialization, but it's a question of saying, how do we actually look at social innovation, right? Are we looking at it from the systems that has been created from a government perspective to create the space for people to do it, which I think the government is trying to do it? Or are we looking at it from communities adopting these spaces and making something come out of them? And I think this is where the question mark is. How are communities getting empowered, and how are they reflecting and getting themselves to a stage where they want to develop some initiatives or some projects that actually satisfy their needs and also yield impact both for the general society but also for them. And this is where I think the question should be, and that I don't have the answer, but I think these are the questions that we should be asking. Yeah.
But for sure, moving forward, one of the things I was very surprised, I'm one of the readers of, the local newspapers from the commune where everything is enlisted. And my commune, for the first time, has a participatory budget. So I knew about another commune that has had it for quite some time, but I was not aware. I just very surprisingly discovered it. And if you don't know, participatory budget means that you can actually have your own projects, get them funded by the commune and develop them. And I think this is a brilliant step forward.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to give financial support to communities to actually test their ideas, because I speak to a lot of NGOs, both in Luxembourg and abroad, and sometimes there's the question of funding. And then even though the funding is there, sometimes they are scared about all the bureaucracy that comes with writing the grant or doing the paperwork. So this is where they need more support to maybe write the grants and also get feedback on what could be improved. So it's a whole step, but then people are sometimes afraid of the whole work that comes with doing all these things. And then it's about maybe deconstructing the different stages that are involved in doing it, and then supporting them to actually go through these processes and secure the support needed, because sometimes it's not even the financial thing. It could be just administrative, it could be legal, it could also just be human resources. Like we said again, question of participation fatigue. How much time do we have to actually invest in alternative activities and other events that could be encouraging community development or to be supportive of community projects? Yeah.
Of course. And how much time do we have also to be a citizen science participant too, right? Because we're also talking about the other thing, that you look at and you're interested in. And so citizen science is a movement as well. What is it and how is it going?
So citizen science, to simplify again, is basically enabling citizens to contribute to scientific knowledge, to creating scientific knowledge. I mean, initially, when it was started by biologists that were watching birds, and then they were trying to categorize different species and then understand how they function, how they live, and where they go, and then all that. So just by creating some gamified approaches for people in the community to go watch birds, reports, it's creating fun spaces where people can actually do things that are interesting for them, but out of it they can also contribute to scientific knowledge, or also proactively engage in the creation of scientific knowledge. So it could involve data collection, so for instance taking pictures of birds, categorizing them, but also analyzing that data could also be empowering for the citizens, because they could develop some skills. So it involves capacity building, which takes time, but I think it's added value because it's a win-win for everybody. The citizens are contributing to scientific work, but also the researcher is also investing and involving the citizens in his research work, and that yields societal impact. So it's scary, it's time-taking, but I think it's worth it.
Scary for the researcher?
On both sides, because sometimes when citizens hear a scientist, this person is a scientist, okay, it's like so high intellectual and everything, but then it's not really that. It's also about making the people understand what we are really working on, and then how this could be beneficial to them and also to scientific work. So if we find ways of making it fun for them, to make them participate and also engage them, I think it's totally worth it for both parties. And by the way, actually we are working on a project with LISER region, and then for that we developed a guide for citizen science. Actually, I co-developed it with some colleagues at the office, so I think that it will be available online at some point, so people to also look at how to develop citizen science projects. It's mainly for scientists, but it could be interesting for people to look at it. There's a lot of tools inside, so I think it's fun.
So once it's done, please share it with me so I can share it with the broader community for those who are interested. I had a researcher from the Museum of Natural History who is involved involved in digitalizing, but also very much involved in iNaturalist. So it's one of those most known apps for exactly taking pictures of plants and then birds and everything and then categorizing them. Cooperating with people, there are always challenges. And one of the things I remember he was mentioning was the fact that, people just take pictures of the plants in their gardens. And yes, true, they are growing in Luxembourg, but we're talking mostly of plants that are just, out there in the wild, if you want, and not what you brought in from a shop. So it's always this question of, of people not understanding exactly why they're doing it and training them again. As I'm saying, a participant has to also learn how to participate.
Yeah, exactly, because it could be a fun exercise, but the exercise is being done for a purpose. And then we need to create the space and then the specifications so that data that is gathered is actually valuable to the scientific purpose that we are looking for. So there's a training process that should be considered to make sure that the right thing is being done, but it could also involve also the expertise of the citizens that we might not have because maybe we are not directly from the community, and then they know the community, they know the local realities more. So it's training not only for the citizen, but also for the researcher itself.
Yeah, it's great that you're saying that. And it also reminds me of another field of research that I really like discussing, which is public history. So we've had a few public historians here in the show, and one of them actually was last year, beginning of this season actually. That's a researcher who is based in Belgium, Tina de Gent, and she's exactly cooperating with museums, and she calls herself even a historian in residence. And it's exactly this idea of reaching out to communities, talking to them and learning from each other and whatever. So very interesting to also observe in Luxembourg because public history is pretty present here. And I even saw today Professor Thomas Covin was sharing some interesting picture of all the communalities, all the things that public history and citizen science have in common. So there is definitely that movement that we could discuss too. But I want more examples. So we talked about the local currency, but you also looked at other things. So what I mean with this, and here I might have a problem with the pronunciation, le biojardin. Am I saying biojardin? Yes. With bio, like bio. Now I'm getting it. Sorry.
Yes.
Le biojardin and ONI. You looked at that too. So we are looking again at an example in France, an example in Luxembourg. So what are they, and what did you find out when you looked at these two examples?
So quickly, biojardin is basically in France. It's like a bio garden where they do food production and they do food baskets. So you register, and every week you receive a basket at home or wherever you want to pick it. Yes, we have a lot of it. And then with products of the season, so food that is currently being grown. So it's to support sustainable farming, but also fair trade. But then what I found interesting about them is they do social professional reinsertion. So they receive people that maybe want to change careers and they don't really know what to do. So they could do a 6-month contract with them to learn a new skill, or it could be someone with a migrant background that wants to integrate in the local community. So through that, they can learn a language, they can learn some skills, they can help them with their paperwork. I found the community aspects very interesting. Why I chose them was not necessarily about them doing the sustainable farming, but also that added value that we're giving to the community, and then redistributing the economic surplus of the activities into the community to empower it. So I found it really interesting. Yeah.
What about ONI?
So ONI was a fair trade shop.
Unfortunately,
yeah,
right?
Unfortunately, it was a fair trade shop in Luxembourg, and then we're the first to do that. And then plastic free, and then selling locally at least fair trade products, and then sustainable bio and everything, which was very interesting. And then they were working with a large voluntary force. So everybody was engaged as a volunteer and trying to support and everything. But unfortunately, financial issues crept in. So again, it highlights what we discussed briefly erstwhile, is the question of social and solidarity economies, sometimes very focused on the ecological impact and then the sustainability impact of the activities. But sometimes the problem that they might face is the questions of funding, and then also how to translate the charters that they have into action. So, for instance, maybe having equal salaries for everybody, or maybe having price capping on specific products and things like that. It involves money, it involves administrative understanding of the legal system and everything. And sometimes it could be difficult. And then this is where consistent training has to be done. But then also that is difficult, because to train, it means you need to have a trainer, and then you need to have the time to do it. You need to have the resources. So it highlights some of the difficulties. I don't think their project was a failed one. I think it was a very good one, because it also shows what is possible and what are the limits of what is possible and how things could be done differently to yield more impact. So I think it's a very good example. And then I wrote a paper with my colleague Elena Emmerich-Schmidt to try to highlight the added value of these initiatives and their transformative potential. So to study the transformation potential of a project, you need more time, longitudinal studies, right? But we didn't have that time, but at least it shows how things could have evolved over time. And I think it's interesting to look at some of these initiatives and see what we can learn from them if you wanted to replicate the idea elsewhere or study it again, right?
So we're talking about mainly bottom-up initiative, but maybe we just should go top-down and just finally is showing already my opinion, but still consider degrowth.
Another buzzword.
So first of all, what is it? Because maybe not everyone knows, which would be surprising in this day and age, but still I would like to make it clear. What is degrowth?
So basically, degrowth is a buzzword. And just to clarify, just from the beginning, degrowth does not mean we want to ruin the economy. We want to crash everything. When I say we, I add myself to people that believe in the movement, because I did my PhD on degrowth, but also because I think it's of time to do it. So degrowth is basically a movement that started in the 70s, talking about how we have maybe maxed out our potential for growth, at least in the global north, so developed countries, as compared to countries in the global south. And maybe it was time to not fixate on production, a linear approach to the economy. We extract, we produce, we consume. And then we cannot keep living like that for the years and the centuries to come. So it was time to maybe start degrowing our activities on the planet, degrowing our economic activities such a way that everybody is satisfied with their standards of living, but also respecting planetary boundaries and also putting the human back at the core of the economy. So not just the economy dictating how we live, but we live in such a way that the economy is a space where everybody could thrive. That is where the idea of a buzzword comes from, because it's a word that shocks, basically. When you hear degrowth, it's kind of shocks, but then it goes just beyond moving from bulb light to the candle, right? So we are not going back to the past, to the pre-industrial revolution and everything. It's basically about rethinking the economy to move beyond the fixation on growth. Like GDP is not what shows the welfare of a state, because we could have a country like Luxembourg. We have very high earners here, but we also have people that are not making half of what some people are making. So we have a high GDP, but is that GDP reflective of the realities at the grassroots level? These are questions. We don't always have the good answers, right?
It's the same with the situation right now with the climate, with all the climate action, whatever, is that it's all proven, scientifically proven, but people are not necessarily active enough, I think. And there are, of course, the deniers, but there are also people who just kind of say, yeah, we know, but next year, both the politicians and just us all together, introducing. And the same here, like what would have to happen to actually change our thinking? Do we need another shock?
I think talking about needing another shock, COVID already was a big shock, right? And then I think through COVID, we realized maybe what our priority should be. At least a lot of people change jobs, for instance, realize, okay, do I actually like my job? Do I actually want to keep doing this? Is my job of real value if life is still continuing, even though I'm not going to work? So there's this process of deconstructing what we have now to reimagine what could be. And I think it's the first process of understanding the realities that are existent, right? And then I think the shock is needed, but we already somehow have it. The next thing is to explain what are the impacts of the shock on our livelihoods and on our current existence, and how do we create a new reality or an alternative reality that would be able to resist this shock, or that would be able to make it such a way that we all could thrive despite the shock. Because sometimes the shocks are created by ourselves. And then I don't want to lambast capitalism, but this is one of the things that we look at: economic disparities, economic insecurities, and everything that is happening could somehow be linked to capitalism, even though it is what has helped us develop to a certain stage, education, having this podcast right here, and everything that goes with producing. It has enabled a lot of good things, but it's also time to maybe rethink how to look at it differently and not look at it from just a financial benefits perspective, but also how do we put the human back at the center of the economy?
These are a lot of questions, and I think the best way to answer them is to leave our listeners with them to rethink, because of course we can't give you the answers right now, but I think it's a good moment to just stop a little bit, stop what you're doing and think a little bit, maybe there is something you can do yourself with all the participatory projects that you can take part in, or maybe, just look at the local currency, go to Canton Redonge and support the local economy. And this means we're coming back to the pub quiz question, you see what a segue. Sorry, I shouldn't be satisfied with myself, but I am. And we're coming back to the question. So Gilles, if you can remind our listeners what the question was and then give us the answer.
So the question was, how many local currencies do we currently have in Europe? Over 100 of them. That's a lot.
It is a lot, and I did not expect that answer, I have to say.
Yes. But then even, do you want to know the shocker? The country that has the most of it, I'm sure some people suspected it, is France. And there's 82 local currencies.
So they're doing basically the most of the job, right? Because if it's 82, then what? We have 18 in other places, right?
Yeah.
Why France?
Well, I think that France has a big history of citizen engagement, grassroots movement, social and solidarity economies. But also there's a law in France on social solidarity economies that was enacted in 2014. It gives the space for people to actually test ideas, to do things, and to support in such dynamics. So I think it's an enabling environment for them. But also in Luxembourg, there is also frameworks for social and solidarity economies at the government level. So there's also the space that is being created to support such initiatives. So we are not behind. We are actually doing some things. It's left to empower communities to understand how to tap into these spaces, how to get funding, how to do things from the legal perspective. So there's a lot of things being done all over Europe, and I think we are in a good trajectory.
So listeners, if this excites you, once again, appeal to you, go check with your commune, with your local communities in general, what they're doing, how you can participate as well. Maybe it's a great moment to do something intergenerationally, exactly. Meet people outside from your bubble, because that's very, very important for our lives and for understanding of the world. And do all these things that we talked about, if you feel like it, of course, because for me, definitely, this is something that I want to be more part of.
Yeah, and definitely. And actually, I just wanted to mention it because sometimes people want to do things, but they don't know where to engage themselves. And I mentioned briefly that currently at LISER, we are working on a project called Regen, so Regeneration of Urban Neighborhoods, which is coordinated by the LIST. But LISER is a partner in charge of the social aspect. So we are doing living labs and then citizen science. And one of the partners is the city of Beckrich. So in Beckrich, we are going to do living labs. We are going to have community events, community activities. And then it could be a nice way to also engage in these spaces and then to test ideas, to co-construct with scientists, to experiment on things that could work in terms of mobility, in terms of decarbonization, and all these kind of things. So it could be very interesting. If people are listening that are living in Luxembourg, you could look at the Regen project or at Beckrich. It could be interesting for people to get engaged. Yeah.
We will share the link for sure, but you made me realize that we can't finish yet because we did not define one more buzzword, which are living labs. I don't want people to be put off right now saying, I don't want to do this.
Can we leave it to them as an assignment, or I should make it simple? Well,
simple, we don't have much time.
So a living lab is basically experimental spaces where different stakeholders meet to test ideas. So it could, I'll just put a full stop here.
Perfect. And then actually, a meeting spot basically for different stakeholders.
Yeah, to test ideas, so to test potential interventions in the community. So maybe, for instance, we are going to put 3D tables in the place to design the cities of the future, to see where we could put some buildings and what are the urban dynamics, what could work, what could not. So it could be experimental spaces for people to test ideas, as simply as I can put it.
Yeah. Thank you. That was very quick and short and nice. So remember, we will share everything. There's a lot of appeals to you today to go check, participate. And what remains is to thank Gilles very much for today. Thank you for sharing all this with us.
Thank you, Anna, for having me. And I hope I was not oversimplifying or overcomplicating things.
No, I think it was all very, very clear. This is it for today, which means don't forget to subscribe, to follow us, to check what we are doing on all the social media. We are present in all the major podcasting platforms and also are looking for guests. If you have someone to suggest, don't forget to contact us as well. This was SciLux, and my name is Hanna Siemaszko.